So we promised a wide variety of opinions on this issue, and our last presenter today represents one of the two accrediting bodies that accredit most of the forensic labs currently in the country. So the two that are available to most laboratories are ASCLD Lab, so the American Society of Crime Laboratory Directors Laboratory Accreditation Board. It's an organization that has now, as we learned, gone under ANAB, and the organization that Karen represents, which is A2LA. So Karen Athanas is a program manager at the American Association for Laboratory Accreditation, or A2LA, and supports the day-to-day operations of the organization by assisting clients in obtaining and maintaining accreditation, providing information and estimates to prospective customers, and assisting in the training and oversight of staff and contracted assessors. As a program manager of the Forensic Accreditation Program at A2LA, Ms. Athanas serves as the recording secretary for Forensic Examination Advisory Committee, maintains the documentation of the program, meets with legislators, government regulators, and technical experts in support of the program. Ms. Athanas has completed training in ISO 15189, ISO IEC 17025, and ISO IEC 17020, and is approved as a lead assessor in the ISO IEC 17020 and 17025 programs. Ms. Athanas is also a committee member on 3 different ASTM committees. She is a member of the Working Group 10 of the ILAC Accreditation Committee, a member of the Subcommittee on Accreditation and Proficiency Testing with the National Commission on Forensic Science, and is also a member of the Quality Infrastructure Committee on the NIST OSAC Committee. So thank you, Karen, for being here, and we'll let you present now.
Yay. Hello, everybody. Nice to meet you all. So there's a lot of differing opinions about accreditation. I've heard both sides of the field, and actually I'm very happy to hear that, because I think that the organizations that are going to be accredited need to really look at what it is they're going to have to be in compliance with, and also end users like yourself, what are you getting out of that accreditation? And maybe what you want to get out of that accreditation will change what we do when we assess organizations. And I'm going to say organizations because, in my view, there's 2 things at play here: laboratories that perform testing and inspection bodies that perform investigations and crime scene analysis. So today I'm going to talk about 3 things. First, what is accreditation? And when I say what is accreditation, I'm talking about accreditation that falls under the International Laboratory Accreditation Cooperation, which is an umbrella organization that recognizes accreditation bodies as meeting a standard. Secondly, is accreditation available for digital forensics? And as we've seen, it is available, but also internationally, what have accreditation bodies done in the field of digital forensics? And finally, why would an organization seek accreditation? Why is it important? Is it critical for this field? And I believe Matthew's already introduced this, but what is accreditation? Accreditation is an independent evaluation of conformity. And so as a third-party organization, an accreditation body gives you an impartial, independent evaluation. But certainly, organizations can evaluate themselves and self-declare. For the purposes of accreditation, this is a third-party evaluation. So we are not related at all. We have no conflicts of interest, and we are giving them an unbiased assessment to set requirements. I did not realize there were graphics in this. Okay, so there are 3 terms that I want to bring to everybody's attention, because in accreditation, it's all about nomenclature, and we're very finicky about using the right words. And so when I talk about accreditation, I'm meaning assessment to an accreditation standard, for example, the 17025 and the 17020 accreditation standards. This is very different from registration, which is only an evaluation of an organization's management structure, policies, and procedures. It doesn't look at their technical expertise, their staff, any of their records. It merely looks at policies and procedures to determine whether they meet the requirements of registration standards such as the ISO 9001. So if you look at trucks driving around on the interstate, you look at manufacturing plants, they're the ones that commonly express their registration to 9001, and there's registries that assess them to that standard, but it's called a registry. And then certification is a higher requirement than accreditation, where it looks not only at testing, but also inspection, as well as compliance with a set of requirements for an item. So a bed frame might be certified, a person might be certified, a process of manufacturing might be certified. And that certification looks at not only the testing of it, but the inspection of it as well. And it's specific to that item. This is just a general picture of the accreditation umbrella that I referenced before that falls under ILAC. There are a number of regional bodies, and I've listed them there for you, that oversee a specific area. And so accreditation bodies are first recognized by that regional body. And once recognized, they can then seek recognition under ILAC, which gives them the ability to be recognized by other accreditation bodies that are similarly recognized. If I am asked if I recognize the accreditation of an organization that doesn't fall under this umbrella, my answer is no, I don't recognize them, because I don't know if they meet the same requirements as my accreditation body. And so when we use this, we're saying all the accreditation bodies meet the same standard and are performing the same functions. And this is what's involved in recognizing an accreditation body. First, a peer evaluation team is formed by the accreditation cooperation, and it's going to include non-biased members of other accreditation bodies and the ILAC organization and regional body. And they do a peer evaluation. It happens every 4 years. And they come in, they look at our compliance to the ISO 17011 standard, which is the standard that accreditation bodies must meet. It also looks at the ILAC specific requirements that we are required to enforce, as well as our accreditation body requirements. Are we following our own policies and procedures? This is an example of what that recognition certificate looks like. And in the accreditation field, we're recognized as meeting 17011, we're not accredited to 17011, so it's a little bit different on the nomenclature as well. But what you can see in what these certificates look like is they spell out which accreditation standards we're recognized to offer accreditation in. And that is important for end users to know, because if an organization is accredited by an accreditation body, if that accreditation body isn't recognized for that accreditation standard, it doesn't mean very much to you, because they haven't had that peer evaluation. You have no confidence that they've enforced that requirement standard the same as other accreditation bodies that have gone under that peer evaluation. And so it is important to check this certificate to see what are they recognized for. And here's another one from ILAC. Here they don't even call it the standards because it's a known, and you have to check the registry, the regional body as well. So they just say testing, calibration, and inspection, which translates to the ISO 17025 standard and the ISO 17020 standard. So what do accreditation bodies do? What do they assess organizations to? There's 4 tiers of requirements that accreditation bodies enforce and assess to. The first is the requirements coming from ILAC. ISO 17011 requires that accreditation bodies do certain things. First, it requires that we ensure compliance with the accreditation standards that we are recognized to offer accreditation to. So that's 17225 or 17020, 15189, 17024, 17034. There are many out there, depending on what type of organization you are. Additionally, ILAC has what we call P-series documents. These are policy documents that specify that our accreditation programs must also include requirements for use of our accredited symbol, so people trying to advertise that they're accredited, participation in proficiency testing, and traceability of measurement results. Now, there's other P-series documents as well, because this starts at P8, but those in general relate to other programs or how we operate, and so they don't really trickle down to the organizations. But all of these P-series documents are free. They're on the ILAC website. I encourage you to take a look at them so that you have a real understanding of what accreditation bodies are required to do. Second tier documents are accreditation body general requirements. These are requirements that apply to any organization that applies to that accreditation body. A2LA currently has about 3,000 organizations accredited by A2LA, and all of them must meet these requirements. And these requirements, as you saw before, are the trickle-down ones from those policy documents coming from ILAC. So you'll see that we have a requirements document for participation in proficiency testing. We have a document for measurement traceability and so forth. And these requirements are assessed during our on-site assessments. Third level is program specific. So up until now, everybody had to meet the same requirements. And so you can expect that these are really a skeleton of requirements that are applicable to any organization that might apply. Things like policies and procedures, record keeping, record maintenance, and that sort of thing. As well as technical competence, what we're looking for in testing or inspection or proficiency testing accreditation. What is the base level that we expect all organizations to meet? The third level of requirements are very specific to a program. So in the area of forensics, ILAC has actually produced a guidance document on what our program-specific requirements should include. And the guide walks you through the forensic science process, through crime scene, through testing, through reporting. And it talks about, okay, for this specific section of 17225 or 17020, this is how it applies in the field of forensics. And from there, the accreditation bodies come out with their supplemental requirements for forensic that include many of these G19 suggested requirements or suggested clarifications. Now, it's important to note everything found in the G19 is present in those ISO IEC 17025 and 17020 documents. This is simply a clarification as to how they applied in that field. And finally, the fourth level are the regulatory and the organization requirements. There are many regulatory programs out there today that HLA is recognized under and accesses to their requirements, as well as any policy or procedure that's outside the 17025 or those 3 tiers of requirements that the organization writes and applies to themselves. We also assess them to those requirements. And I think that Risa alluded to that as well, is don't write yourself into a corner is something we commonly say to our organizations. If you write in your procedure that everything must be written in blue ink, we're going to assess you to that requirement. We're going to write deficiencies here, there, and everywhere. And so it's something we try to impress on our organizations. And a common theme in the community is that when you find requirements that seem crazy, it's probably because an organization wrote them and not us. Because our requirements are based on consensus and typically are the skeleton, the bare bones. Examples of regulatory requirements in forensics, one example is the Maryland Department of Mental Health and Mental Hygiene has a regulation, I've listed the title there for you, for forensic laboratories. All forensic laboratories in the state offering services in the state of Maryland have to become licensed, and they have quite an in-depth regulatory requirements related to that. So all accreditation bodies recognized would then assess those laboratories to those regulatory requirements. And also familiar is the NDIS Procedures Board's FBI Quality Assurance Standards, which are applied to DNA testing laboratories that want to upload to CODIS. Okay, so from there, the question is, can we apply accreditation requirements to certain disciplines? And as an international community, what we do is we come together and we say, have we done it yet? And how did it work out for us? And so what I did is I went through all 87 currently recognized accreditation bodies in the world, and I said, have they done this? And the answer is yes. I found 51 organizations that are accredited to perform digital forensics. Now, I will admit to you, there may be more because some websites are in foreign languages that I could not get Google Translate to translate for me. So there may be more. But the ones I found, 48 of them were accredited under 17025 program, and 2 of them were accredited under the 17020 program. And just speaking from my personal opinion, I feel that the 020 program is more appropriate for digital forensics. And we can get into that later as to why. So, knowing that people have done it, so it is possible, the question is, do you need to? Is there a benefit to it? And that really is something that the community has to come together and discuss and decide. Because I'm a nonprofit, I'm not pushing accreditation. I'm here as a service. And so if you feel digital forensics is fine as it is, then I'm not saying anything about it. But what I'm here to do is tell you what accreditation offers you that might be beneficial. That is why some agencies have decided that accreditation is necessary. Okay, so Obviously, HLA works in many, many other industries than forensics. And in those industries like trade organizations, manufacturing, accreditation is key when you're shipping materials from country to country, because you don't want to have to test it in every port. And so internationally recognized accreditation means that your test results from Japan are going to be accepted in the United States when your items are delivered, instead of them having to then have them test a second time when they went into the States. And that was the original purpose of forming ILAC. HLA is actually one of the original signatories to ILAC. But since then, it's taken on a whole new purpose for different regulations like the food industry, like the medical industry. For example, for CLIA, for medical testing laboratories, accreditation has become a key process to ensure that laboratories have the proper policies and procedures and quality management structure in place to identify when test results go, out the window and patient care becomes a question mark. Additionally, all of our accredited organizations, or a fair amount of them, have expressed improved performance from gaining accreditation. And the reason for that is when you have policies and procedures written, when you have it written down what you do and you do what you have written down, things become quicker, things become more efficient, things become more cost effective. You can now concentrate on how can I make it better now that I've set it in place. And so what our organizations see is improved performance throughout their organization. For end users such like yourself, accreditation becomes key when you've lost confidence in the work being performed, or that you don't have confidence in the first place. Having a third party look at the process and give you that accreditation, give you that certificate with a scope that says what you looked at when you were on site. All accreditation bodies are required to issue a scope of accreditation. And that scope, just like those certificates from ILAC that I showed you, identify what did we look at when we were on site, what methodologies did we look at, what technologies. We look at a sampling of all of the technicians. We watch them perform the work that they're purporting to perform. And when we listed on the scope, that means we assessed it and confirmed technical competence and set procedures that are in place. Additionally, all of those scopes are available on accreditation body websites. So when I did that search of all 87 accreditation bodies, I went to each of their websites, I looked up their scopes, and I said, okay, what's listed on there? And so now you have an availability to you to search around. Okay, I know that there's this many accreditation bodies that offer accreditation to this discipline. Let's see who's actually accredited to perform that activity. And if I see a fair number, you can start asking the unaccredited organizations why they haven't gone to that level. Perhaps they have already self-assessed themselves and they know they're in compliance and they can show you evidence of that, and that will give you confidence. Others haven't done that, haven't documented their systems, and when you ask this question, you will find out that maybe that's not a reliable source for your inspection or testing. Additionally, it was also suggested that government organizations enforce regulations and do these assessments. And there are certainly different government organizations that do that. But what we found over time is that many of them have transitioned to using accreditation bodies, and for very important reasons. Funding is key. When funding gets cut, they can't afford the experts that they need to perform those audits. Nonprofits work separately, and we pay our technical experts separately, and so we can confirm that we will always have the expertise needed to assess those technical capabilities. But also, time constraints prevent them performing audits and on-site inspections, assessments on a regular basis. And accreditation bodies work differently from that. We're outside the system. So we see an organization that's accredited by us that isn't meeting our requirements, we can cut them off very quickly, where a regulatory body may not be able to. Okay. So I've concluded my contact information because I would like you to contact me. I am a nonprofit. I am available to the community. I frequently tell laboratories and crime scene units and end users to call me with questions. Do you want to know what's in 17025? Do you want to know what's in 17020? Do you want to know how we apply our requirements or how we perform our assessments? Feel free to ask me, because we are available to you to answer those questions. Okay.
So we do have a little bit of time for questions. One of the questions that I'll start with, We talked a little bit about the 17020 or 17025 program being more appropriate for this, and I know several of you had comments on that, but if you would also focus your comments on how would it apply to the investigative or to the laboratory end? I'm not sure who wants to start. Karen, you want to start?
Could you explain the difference between the two, please?
Well,
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, the 17025 and the 17020 standards are very similar. And in fact, the 17025 standard is currently under revision, and it will very soon look very similar to the 17020 in structure and language. The main differences between the 17025 and the 17020 standard is the emphasis added. 17025 is meant for testing. So any kind of analysis of an item to determine characteristics of that item is considered a test. And so 17025 in many cases is considered the more appropriate standard. Now, when you talk about patient care, then you bring into a third standard, which is the 15189 for clinical laboratories, which I'm not going to talk too much about here because it doesn't really relate. But the 17020 standard, the emphasis is on professional judgment of the inspector or the investigator. And because they are the ones that determine when they are assessing an item, inspecting a scene, evaluating a system, whether it meets known requirements or expected circumstances. And they use that professional judgment, years of experience, training, education, certification, to decide what items need to be collected, what documentation should be taken, what determinations should be made, and also what testing might need to be requested from a testing laboratory. And so by using those two standards, and there is a lot of crossover, there are some processes where you just have to flip a coin and say, I'm going to use this standard. And that's why you see internationally, both standards have been used in the area of digital forensics. I know some accreditation bodies say, if it happens in the lab, then it's a laboratory activity, 17025. If it happens in the field, it's 17020. And other accreditation bodies try to make that determination, is professional judgment the key aspect of the activity, or is the instrumentation and the test part of it the key aspect? And they separate the accreditations based on that.
Risa, did you want to weigh in?
I've been asked that, and basically since my entire history has been with 17025, and I've found a way of working with that standard and finding what makes sense and how to write the policy to, I did not see the need to switch to 17020. But if someone is starting this process and doesn't want to have to figure out testing of equipment and in the laboratory setting, it's possible. I mean, there's similarities, like you said, Karen. It depends upon where your computer forensics sits. If your computer forensics is part of your forensic laboratory already, and the majority of your entity is 17025, then it doesn't necessarily hold true to go two different paths. So I can definitely see the smaller entities that might have just the investigative side of house, it might be more preferable to go 17020. But if you're part of a laboratory system, which my group is, 17025 made the most sense for us.
Thank you. We have, please.
I think that accreditation really helps big systems develop a culture of quality. I also think it's oversold in terms of public confidence. I read weekly about some bad thing happening in crime labs. We never see good stuff about crime labs in the paper.
Right.
With one exception. Recently, the Rhode Island definitely covered. But mostly it's bad publicity about crime labs screwing up. And I go to the ASCLD Lab website, and I look for laboratories under, laboratories on probation, none. Laboratories on suspension, none. I don't believe that ASCLD Lab has an effective enforcement mechanism, even though they sell themselves as having such.
This kind of underscores what I feel is the circular argument about the whole thing, where they have these standards, and the question is 020, 025 kind of undermines the argument of whether it's applicable at all. And if you get to choose the standard and write a whole bunch of policy to interpret the standard, and you either write it so tightly that it's blue ink and you're writing yourself into a corner and it's cumbersome and you can't operate within it, or you write it so broadly that it really has no influence on the quality of your products, then you see where you're going here. What value does it bring? When we look at one of the greatest, the most visible failures of accredited lab or laboratories recently is the FBI hair sample matching. You know, these, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the FBI has accredited labs. And my experience specifically in digital forensics is that the quality of the product, the relevance of the report, the quality of the interpretation is in no way indicative of accreditation, or accreditation seems to have no bearing. I've seen really, really good reports come from examiners with good training, good certification, who operate outside of accreditation. And I've seen some really, really poor quality results come from labs that are highly accredited to a number of different standards. And at this point, without a fundamental or a specifically applicable standard that's been raised through the community and pointed to as this is the standard that we all agree on is applicable, is valuable to us, we're premature to go to the point to say that, you know, well, we can't introduce your evidence because it didn't come from an accredited lab. We would be just as irresponsible if we said, well, we're automatically going to accept this exhibit because it came from an accredited lab. And I don't think anybody here would welcome that argument.
John, I think, yeah, that I agree, believe it or not, I do. Accreditation doesn't deal with the individual. It deals with the laboratory and the overall operation of the laboratory. There's no way that we can prevent an analyst from messing up, and if they mess up, we hope to catch it by having a peer review, but it may be something flawed in their exam process. One of the things that I think in the industry as a whole is the marriage of the accreditation and certification. I think if you want to make sure that you are doing the best you can, I think it has to be a marriage of both. That you can have your laboratory operating to the best it can, following, you know, best practices and so forth, but you also have to put in the factor of human. And we all are human, we all make mistakes, right? And we hope we can catch them, but sometimes we don't. So the certification at least ensures a level of training and testing that has occurred with that person, and we still hope that they will carry that over in their forensic work, but sometimes that doesn't happen. So no matter how good we are, there's going to be those nice cases in the public that come out, and we hope to learn from them and try not let it happen again, but they will always be wonderful news for fueling the fire.
Jonathan.
So I appreciate the discussion surrounding ISO 17825, 17820. Several of the commenters on one of the commission's recommendations also suggest looking at the ISO 27035 that apply more to IT services, even e-discovery. I understand some of those documents are coming under development at this time. Could you comment on the possibility of using those standards under the scope of accreditation?
Yeah, I have read some of them, and they translate very closely to what would be a process standard rather than an accreditation standard, because they don't touch on requirements for purchasing or document control very much. But they definitely are useful, and we could assess and accredit to them on a scope of accreditation.
Please.
I think the issue that two of you are talking about with whether to accredit or not with digital evidence applies to small sections of police departments or law enforcement agencies that perform fingerprint analysis, or ID sections that do videotaping, photograph crime scenes. They're going to experience the same sort of pressure that you're responding to with for the host of reasons that you listed. It doesn't necessarily prevent scandal, it does not necessarily need or kind of slow down casework, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know if we want to call it forensic evidence. Do you call yourselves, I mean, accreditation is for laboratory. Do you call yourselves a laboratory? How do we define laboratory?
I think that's a very good question. What Troy mentioned, we pushed for a long time for computer forensics to have a seat at the grown-up table with the sciences. And certainly everything we do, everything all of us do with computers is founded on a base of computer science. There's finite math, there's processors, there's all these things that build a framework and a structure upon which our iPhones work, and we can watch videos on the internet. There's still a question as to whether or not using that framework to extract a document and evaluate the metadata, is that really science? Is it, is the way Microsoft Word encodes user information into a Word document or a PowerPoint presentation, is parsing that meta and providing it as an exhibit as user attribution to some sort of illicit activity, is that really science, or is it just IT-related work? Is it computer investigative analysis, which is what the term of art is evolving to? So it's a very good question. Is it laboratory? The comparison of fingerprints, I don't know that it really applies. Fingerprints have been the same for 100,000 years in the way they look. Now, we have better techniques for looking at them and matching them, but computer forensics isn't a matching science. We're not testing to see, is this a computer or not? Is this file, to some degree, is the file exist, could be a matching case, but in more cases, it's an investigation into what this computer did or how it was involved in the crime, or is it a repository for other leads, investigative leads to follow. So in my mind, it's more of an investigation unto itself rather than a forensic test for a match or a probability that this is Joe's computer. I don't know if that directly answers your question, but certainly those arguments do apply. Should an examiner, a fingerprint examiner in a small local lab be accredited? Perhaps. I don't have any objection to quality assurance reviews, quality standards for procedures if they're appropriate. But what I see now is a fractured set of standards, and you're trying to a la carte pick different things and try to shoehorn them and make them applicable to a wholly different thing that evolves at a much faster rate. I can look at fingerprints that were lifted from glass in 1930 and still match them today using the same techniques they used then. Looking at an iPhone to get evidence off it is a wholly different thing than it was 2 years ago.
I appreciate the comments of the committee or of the panel up here. I also wanted to mention that this is an emerging topic. You will see in a couple weeks here, it will be before the National Commission on Forensic Science. Many of these presenters will be at SWIG-DE discussing this topic next week. So please stay tuned and put in your public comments as these documents become available. Again, I want to thank all of our presenters today.